Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty wild. We're exploring how your tongue acts as this incredibly high-definition, real-time biological monitor for your entire body. I mean, we usually just think of our tongues for, tasting our food or talking, but we're going to look at the fascinating science of how this single muscle physically projects the hidden state of your internal health.
So right off the bat, you might be wondering, why on earth have doctors been staring at tongues for over 2 millennia? It's a great question. Let's actually validate this ancient practice for a second. It wasn't magic, and it definitely wasn't just guesswork. What we're talking about is early humans observing very real physiological data way before they had the scientific vocabulary or the microscopes or the blood tests to actually describe what they were seeing. They were quite literally looking at a physical dashboard of the human body.
And here's the really crucial point to keep in mind. The ancient terms they used were simply early codes for real, observable biological events. When an ancient practitioner saw a bright red tip of the tongue and called it heart fire, they were actually observing what we now know is sympathetic nervous system activation, or acute systemic inflammation. Think about that for a second. The language completely evolved, sure, but the biological signal they were reading, that hasn't changed a bit. Okay, let's open up this biological user manual. Our agenda today covers 6 key areas. 1. The biological screen. 2. Shape and motion signals. 3. Decoding color and moisture. 4. The microbiome coding. 5. The spatial map. And finally 6. Separating signal from noise. We're going to decode all of this step by step.
All right, Section 1, the ultimate biological screen. Why the tongue is a physiological marvel. What's really interesting here is how the tongue is uniquely wired. It actually holds 3 massive anatomical privileges. First off, it has the highest terminal blood vessel density. It's basically unshielded, meaning its capillaries are right there near the surface, giving us a flawless signal-to-noise ratio for what's going on in your blood. Second, it's governed by 4 separate cranial nerves. That gives it a massive footprint in the brain's motor homunculus, which is just a fancy way of saying it takes up a huge amount of your brain's processing power. And third, it's a continuous mucosal link, literally straight down to your gut.
Now, to actually read this screen properly, we have to split these physiological phenomena into 2 distinct systems. First, you've got your fast system. This changes in seconds to minutes. We're talking moisture and motion, which are driven by lightning-fast neurological responses. Then on the flip side, you have your slow system. This takes days, sometimes weeks, to change. This includes the tongue's shape, its overall color, and its coating. These are your slow-burning metabolic and structural accumulations.
Moving right along to Section 2, shape and motion signals, reading the physical deformations.
Ever look in the mirror and notice scalloped edges or weird teeth marks on the side of a tongue? The ancient myth calls this spleen dampness, but the modern biological reality? That's tissue edema and low albumin. A plump tongue with teeth marks isn't some mysterious dampness. It's a very real physical deformation caused by fluid retention, or tissue edema, making the tongue swell up and press against the rigid boundary of your teeth. You'll actually see this a lot during periods of incredibly intense, stressful workdays, or with conditions like sleep apnea.
All right, let's talk about those fast motion signals. You can actually test your own cranial wiring right this second with a 30-second mirror test. Just relax, breathe deeply, extend your tongue naturally, and watch it for 30 seconds. By holding it out like that, you can spot critical neurological signals right away. For example, a deviation where the tongue pulls strongly to one side, that perfectly highlights a unilateral hypoglossal nerve issue, a mechanical imbalance in your muscle tension. Or if you see fine tremors, that might be pointing to a highly stimulated sympathetic nervous system.
Section 3, decoding color and moisture, hemodynamics and the autonomic switch.
Because the tongue's surface is so incredibly thin, the color you're seeing is basically just a blood spectrum. A pale tongue directly indicates a lack of hemoglobin or really poor peripheral blood flow. If it's a deep crimson red, that reveals vasodilation from immune responses. That means your body is flooded with inflammatory markers, like TNF-alpha or IL-6. And what if it has a purple hue? Well, that warns of hypoxia or microcirculation stasis. Basically, that's oxygen depletion in the blood showing right through the tissue.
And the moisture level, that brilliantly illustrates your autonomic switch. Think about that intensely dry mouth you get right before a high-stakes job interview. That is not just nerves. That is your sympathetic nervous system hitting the fight or flight switch. It literally cuts off the blood supply to your salivary glands to conserve energy for a perceived physical threat. Conversely, a nice, wet, resting tongue means your parasympathetic system, your rest and digest mode, is safely in charge.
Section 4.
The microbiome coating, your digestive tract's ecological projection.
So let's talk about the tongue coating. It is definitely not just some weird bodily fluid. It's an active biological film. The strict definition of a tongue biofilm is a dynamic, ecological balance of desquamated keratinized cells, which, by the way, is just a super fancy medical term for shedding dead skin cells, along with saliva and literally billions of commensal bacteria. This brilliantly illustrates that your tongue coating is the physical projection of your gastrointestinal tract. It is the exact same embryological tissue as your gut, constantly balancing cell turnover and bacterial competition right there where you can easily see it.
But what happens when this biofilm overloads? Well, when your digestion slows down, the mouth's natural self-cleaning mechanism actually fails, and that leads to a thick, white buildup of cells. This can turn into a yellow coating when white blood cells from an immune response, along with heat-loving, color-producing bacteria, join the party. And what about that really scary-looking black or hairy tongue? Believe it or not, that is extreme dysbiosis. It's usually a massive fungal and bacterial overgrowth that happens right after heavy antibiotic use.
Section 5. The tongue's spatial map. Why specific zones match specific organs.
When we map out the tongue, we have to understand that these zones are not mystical energy centers. The tip represents terminal perfusion. That's basically blood flow reaching the very end of the line, and it reacts instantly to blood pressure and sympathetic tone, which ancient doctors naturally labeled heart and lungs. The edges reflect mechanical jaw-clenching stress and lymphatic immunity. The center shares digestive cell rhythms and is super dense with papilla. And the root? That is wired directly to the vagus nerve, giving us a literal readout of deep visceral organs like your intestines. It is an absolute anatomical marvel of shared nervous system pathways.
Section 6. Separating signal from noise. Don't let your lunch deceive your eyes.
Now, before you go diagnosing yourself in the bathroom mirror, we absolutely need to calibrate our biological screen by filtering out the daily static. You've got to watch out for common false signals. Coffee and tea contain tannins that will physically dye your tongue biofilm brown. A red tongue right after eating spicy food isn't systemic inflammation at all. It's literally just capsaicin triggering TRPV1 heat receptors to temporarily flood that specific area with blood. And eating piping hot food, that can cause minor thermal damage to your papilla. So always evaluate your tongue in a natural state, completely free of any recent food or drink interference.
So here's the thought we're going to end on today. In an era of ubiquitous CT scans and gene sequencing, what is your built-in biological screen trying to tell you today? We have all this amazing modern technology at our fingertips, yet this incredibly sensitive, dense network of nerves, blood vessels, and microbiome data is sitting right there, updating in real time. Take a moment tomorrow morning to look in the mirror and ask yourself what this highly sensitive biological screen is revealing about your health. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep learning.